You were taught it in school. Survival of the fittest, a brutal, beautiful competition where only the strong endure. But what if this story was never about nature? What if it was about control? And what if believing it has made us more harvestable than any other species on Earth? Welcome to Mysterious Encounters. This afternoon, we question one of the most foundational stories of our civilization. Not to deny science, but to ask, who wrote this story? Who benefits from us believing it? And what happens when we realize we were never just survivors, but fuel? Natural selection, evolution through competition, the strong survive, the weak perish, and over millions of years. This relentless winnowing produces the diversity of life we see today. It is elegant, it is brutal, it is convenient. Charles Darwin gave us this story in 1859, but Darwin did not invent his ideas in a vacuum. He was a product of the Industrial Revolution, a time when competition was being elevated from an economic observation to a universal law. The factories, the railways, the emerging corporations all were teaching the same lesson: compete or die. What if Darwin did not discover a law of nature? What if he projected the values of his time onto the natural world and then used that projection to justify the values of his time? Survival of the fittest became the perfect myth for an age of empire, exploitation, and extraction. Look closer at nature, and a different picture emerges. Not competition, but cooperation. Not survival of the strongest, but survival of the most connected. Mycorrhizal networks, underground fungal connections that allow trees to share nutrients, to warn each other of danger, to keep dying stumps alive for centuries. This is not competition, this is community. Symbiosis, organisms that do not compete but merge. Lichen is not one organism, but two fungus and algae, either of which could survive the other's environment alone. They do not fight, they become something new together. Altruism, species that risk themselves for the group. Prairie dogs that sound alarms knowing it attracts predators. Whales that adopt orphaned calves of other species. Behaviors that make no sense in a purely competitive framework. The natural world is not a battlefield, it is a network. And networks, as we have learned throughout this investigation, are much harder to harvest than isolated competitors. So why was the competition myth so aggressively promoted? Because it serves the interests of those who wish to harvest us. If life is a competition, then losing is natural. Your poverty is not a system failure, it is your personal failure in the great contest. Your addiction is not engineered, it is your weakness. Your despair is not harvested, is your just reward for not being fit enough. The survival myth absolves the machine. It makes us blame ourselves for our own harvesting. It turns our attention away from the algorithms, the debt engines, the ancient hunger unto our own perceived inadequacies. And it divides us. If we are all competitors, then every other person is a threat. We cannot organize. We cannot share what we see. We cannot awaken together. We are kept isolated, desperate, and infinitely more harvestable. There is another problem with the survival myth, one that the machine would prefer you never examine. The numbers do not support it. The fossil record does not show gradual competitive progression. It shows long periods of stability punctuated by sudden explosions of diversity and sudden mass extinctions. The pattern is not competition, it is crisis. 99.9% of all species that have ever existed are extinct, not because they were unfit, because the rules changed, because the environment shifted, because a comet hit or the climate warmed or the oceans acidified. In those moments, the fittest died alongside the weakest. Survival had nothing to do with competition and everything to do with circumstance. The machine wants you to believe in competition because competition makes you try harder, produce more, accept worse conditions. But the fossil record tells a different story. We are all, ultimately, at the mercy of forces far larger than our individual fitness. What if we told a different story? What if, Instead of survival of the fittest, we taught survival of the most connected. History's greatest leaps were not competitive, they were cooperative. The agricultural revolution did not happen because one tribe conquered another. It happened because humans learned to share knowledge, to domesticate together, to build communities. The scientific revolution was not a competition between lone geniuses. It was a network-led exchange, ideas shared, building on each other's work across continents and centuries. The internet itself, for all its current corruption, began as a cooperative project, scientists and universities sharing information freely, without profit motive, because connection was its own reward. The machine has co-opted these cooperative structures and turned them into harvesting apparatuses. But the original impulse, the desire to connect, to share, to build together still exists. It is the one thing the machine cannot fully harvest. Perhaps evolution is real, but we have misunderstood its direction. Perhaps the true endpoint of evolution is not a super competitor, but a super connector. Consciousness itself may be nature's way of creating more complex networks. Not to compete better, but to connect more deeply, to see more clearly, to share more fully. This is where the survival myth becomes most dangerous. It tells us that awakening is pointless, that we are just individuals in a meaningless competition, that our seeing changes nothing. But what if awakening is itself an evolutionary step? What if the ability to see the machine, to understand the harvest, to connect with others who see, what if this is the next phase of human development? The machine does not want us to evolve. It wants us to stay exactly as we are, isolated, competitive, harvestable. Our awakening threatens its existence. Our connection threatens its feeding. Our cooperation threatens its ancient, patient hunger. We have traced the survival myth from Darwin's notebooks to your phone's notifications. We have seen how it keeps us isolated, competitive, and harvestable. We have glimpsed an alternative, a story of connection, cooperation, and collective awakening. But stories are not enough. Seeing is not enough. The machine has faced challengers before. It has absorbed their energy, co-opted their symbols, and continued feeding. Tonight, we ask the question that the survival myth was designed to prevent. What happens when the harvest refuses to be harvested? What happens when the awakened stop competing and start connecting? When they share what they have seen, not as isolated individuals, but as a network? When they build something the machine cannot penetrate, cannot co-opt, cannot consume? Tonight, on Mysterious Encounters, we explore the most dangerous idea the machine has ever faced, that we are not competitors, but co-conspirators in our own liberation. That awakening is not individual, but collective, that together we might just starve the ancient hunger. Tonight's case file, the awakening. The harvest refuses to be harvested.